Good afternoon.
It was a no-show in Vegas.
I was just on the phone with President Biden, and he shared his deep disappointment at not being able to join us this afternoon. The president has been at many events, as we all know, and he just tested positive for COVID.
A few hours earlier, before his diagnosis, Mr. Biden had been pressing the flesh and hopefully not infecting people in a Mexican restaurant, campaigning that he won't be able to do, at least for a few days. A growing number of senior Democrats and now former President Obama have reportedly asked him privately to reconsider his candidacy, but he's said only a serious medical condition would stop him running.
And quite frankly, I think the only thing age brings a little bit of wisdom. And I think I've demonstrated that I know how to get things done.
How are you feeling? Mr. President, how do you feel? How do you feel?
Air Force One was waiting to whisk him away from Las Vegas to self-isolation. He's reportedly suffering from a cough, a runny nose, and like the Democratic Party itself, general malaise. Wealthy Leesburg in Loudoun County, Virginia, is solidly Democrat, or was. A new poll suggests that while the Democratic candidate for the Senate is 10 points ahead of his Republican rival, Biden is now 2 points behind Trump in Virginia.
We heard that Biden was supposed to be a one-term president, right? And, you know, I think people are very concerned about his performance. And I think a lot of people wanted a better choice for the candidate, you know, but we continue to do what we've always done.
They're loyal. They just want the Democratic leaders to make up their minds.
The president is the figure, is the CEO, right? But you have different directors on the board, you have different chiefs, you have, like, everybody has a department or responsibility. So he's not the man or the person who's in every one of these roles.
But he's got to win an election.
He's got to win the election, and I think he will win the election.
Everything. That's your personal book?
This is mine, yeah.
Wow.
At the local independent bookstore, the book group is discussing, of all things, Henry IV Part 2, the one where the king is dying and his heir apparent is readying for power. Any resonance?
What you were saying about him being on his deathbed and not wanting to relinquish the definitely sounds similar.
To somebody you can think of.
To somebody I can think of, yes. Even if it's for the good of the people, like, he won't step down, yeah.
We're not totally bailing on Biden. He's done great things, but it is time for the next generation based on performance lately.
Is it too late to change in this electoral cycle?
To change candidates, or for him to change? I don't know. It's getting late. It's later every day, but it's never too late until it's too late.
Last night, the president landed in his home state of Delaware. Every step down a moment of jeopardy. He accepts Shakespeare's words, "We are time's subjects," but seemingly not, or maybe not yet, the second part of that line, "and time bids be gone."
Now, I promise you, this is not a heavy metal dungeon disco. This is in the middle of the afternoon in Milwaukee at the Republican National Convention. They're channeling the music for tonight's big event with Donald J. Trump. Next to me, Siobhan Kennedy, our Washington correspondent. Let's try and stay away from the music for a bit. What happens now? And we don't know yet whether Biden has actually decided to leave, right?
Well, Matt, for all the noise, the political noise and the noise, there is no ousting Joe Biden. There is no process like there is in the UK, any 1922 committee here. If Joe Biden is to go, he is to go voluntarily. If all the manoeuvrings work and he agrees to go voluntarily, then that would happen at the convention in August, and then we would think, we don't know, that he would endorse his Vice President Kamala Harris. Then the delegates, the 4,000 delegates, and all the money would pass to her. She's on the joint ticket. That doesn't mean that somebody else could come forward, one or two other people, and challenge, and then there could be potentially an open contest. The names, of course, there, the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, and Josh Shapiro, even the governor of Pennsylvania. They could come forward, but what would it look like? They're going to come forward and say, hang on a minute, we think we're better than the vice president, an African-American woman.
Right, and all this could be done at the convention in Chicago in a couple of weeks from now, in a month from now?
That's in theory. I mean, obviously there'll be a lot of noise between now and then if he makes that decision to go, but technically the process of passing the baton on to somebody else would happen there if he's going to do it. And it is not yet clear that he's going to do it. There's a lot of noise around it, but he is still insisting that he is the man for the job.
Finally and briefly, which name would you pick out of the hat to say most likely person to take over from Joe Biden at the top of the ticket?
I think it'd be very, very difficult for them if he endorses Kamala Harris, his vice president. It'd be very difficult for somebody else to step in. I should say, though, that talking to Democratic voters who are wanting Joe Biden to step aside, the only thing that they also say is that the only other person they think could least do it is Kamala Harris. She is not popular with Democratic voters either. They are looking for a charismatic figure like a Gavin Newsom to step in, who they believe is articulate, charismatic enough to potentially wipe the floor when it comes to debates next to President Trump.
Siobhan, thank you very much indeed. Okay, well, let's go straight to Cornel Belcher, a political strategist and pollster for the Democratic Party on both Barack Obama's presidential campaigns, or both of those campaigns, rather. Cornel Belcher, great to have you on the program. I mean, it hasn't happened yet in terms of Joe Biden. Do you think it is now inevitable?
Well, a couple of things. I want to level set with your viewers, a couple of things. And one, I want to start by saying how much I appreciate all the Shakespearean references. We don't get that a lot in American news. But let's level set. So right now, and you are leaning in all the polling, I hope that we're not setting a standard. If a candidate is 3 points behind in the polling, they should be ousted, right? Because right now you still, and most of, on average in American polling that from credible news sources, it's a 2 or 3 point race either way, just like it was before the debates. And look, if you go back in history, right, 2012 at this time, Barack Obama was also in a toss-up race, and depending on the poll, a 2 or 3 points behind Mitt Romney. So I hope we're not saying we forced someone out because they're behind in the polls. But look, But look, there is.
This isn't just about percentages, though, is it? I mean, even Barack Obama has said reportedly, "Please, it's time to go." You know, senior Democrats in the Senate, in the House have said that the opinion polls, the internal polling in the Democratic Party doesn't look pretty either.
Well, I'm an eternal poller of the Democratic Party, and again, if it's a race to the 3 point race, we don't force people out. And here's the other thing. Barack Obama didn't say for him to leave, right? He told, again, like a lot of Democrat leaders, they're saying, you know, you should think about this, whether or not it's time to leave or not. But in the end, we got to be careful about what we ask for, because in the end, a convention that is thrown into chaos where they try to step across and over Joe Biden's VP and Harris on national television would be an absolute disaster for us in energizing and mobilizing our base and grassroots.
Okay. All right. So let's assume for a minute that this is all going to be over in the next 24 or 48 hours, and I may still be proven wrong, and so may many other people. Do you think that the most elegant and the best solution for the party would be Kamala Harris taking over at the top of the ticket, or once the dam has burst, should it be someone else?
Well, I'm just going to look at play it straight here, right? I don't have a dog in this fight. I will say this: there's 14 million voters who have voted in the Democratic primary for Joe Biden, and this process, there's a process for the voters having a say in who the candidate is. If we're going to throw out 14 million votes and have a few people pick the candidate for the top of the ticket, I think that's really problematic, and it becomes, really tough for us to energize and mobilize voters. And particularly if that's someone who is not currently been part of that ticket, and Vice President Harris, I think it would be absolutely disastrous if they try to jump over the first African American woman of color VP and pick, be quite blunt, a white guy for the top of the ticket. Given where the base of this party is, I think they will be handing Donald Trump the White House.
Okay, and just briefly, do you think that Kamala Harris could beat Donald Trump? Because here they're very confident that she can never do that.
Who is they, right? I worked for Barack Obama. You know what they were very confident about? That Barack Obama, one, couldn't beat Hillary Clinton, and two, this African American with a Muslim sounding name certainly couldn't be elected president of the United States. Stop with the polling. Polling is not predictive. Polling is instructive. It's not predictive. A 3 or 4 point race, you build a campaign to overcome that, and you tell that story.
Okay. Conor Belcher, thank you very much indeed for coming on the program. Well, let's go to Vienna, where I'm joined by the Yale University historian, Professor Tim Snider, who has written extensively about the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, and whose new book, On Freedom, explores the fragility of democracy, including in this country. Professor Snider, it's good to have you in the program. How much of a mess is the Democratic Party in, that they've left these crucial decisions, arguably knowing that Joe Biden was in a frail state and of advanced age for many months and years now? They've left it so late.
Honestly, I have to say, maybe contrary to the general mood, I don't think that's such a big deal. We were 4 months away from an election. The United Kingdom just ran a full election in, 6 weeks? The French take 3. Our election campaigns take 2 years. That's a long time. Things can happen along the way during those 2 years where you might want to say, it's time to shake things up a little bit. So on the contrary, I would rather be the Democrats and still have options than be the Republicans and be locked into the ticket that they've got right now.
And of course, until 1968, the nominee in the Democratic Party, until that rather messy convention in Chicago, was decided at the convention.
Yeah, I don't think, people remember 1968, as your question indicates, and I don't think we're very likely to see a messy convention. I think if there is some kind of change, it will be either that Biden makes it clear that he prefers Kamala Harris, or there's some kind of set of mini convention processes, or the most radical possibility, he actually resigns the office of presidency, hands it over to Kamala Harris, lets her run as an incumbent, and then serves as her surrogate on the campaign trail. But I don't think it's going to come down to nobody having any ideas what to do with the convention.
Let's move on to the consequences. If Donald Trump, the man speaking here tonight, wins this election, what's at stake for America? What's at stake for Ukraine and for Europe?
Yeah, I can't help but point out that that's kind of the sweet spot for the Democrats. There really aren't that many Americans who are keen on never voting again. And a Trump-Vance ticket is the sharpest version of that you can possibly have. Trump has said that he will contest the outcome no matter what it is. Vance has been the most radical in supporting that. Their platform is essentially one of dismantling the American state into chaos, which is not something that people really want. So the consequences would be, if they win, in the best case, America disappears from foreign affairs. In the worst case, America very quickly shifts over to a side which is, broadly speaking, anti-European and certainly anti-Ukrainian.
Here they would say that this is democracy at work. They have democratically chosen Donald J. Trump to take over. That even though the Supreme Court has handed him these new powers, he will serve as a democratically elected second-term president. And that's it.
I would be very surprised if they were to say something else, but we're in a very unusual situation where they've nominated the convicted felon who organizes stochastic terror against his own party, so the Republicans cease to run for office because they're afraid for their own lives and their lives of their families. The fact that they've chosen him as their nominee, I think, more shows how their party has changed than reflects anything like democracy. We will see what happens when there's a vote, but I've got to say the fact that people in Milwaukee are hyper convinced and run a 4-day exercise that looks much like a religious rally than a convention doesn't suggest to me that they necessarily have a majority of votes.
But they've also planned for the future, haven't they, with the appointment of J.D. Vance as the vice presidential candidate. He's a true believer in America first and arguably America alone, and he's only 39 years old.
I'd like to politely say that it's impossible to say that J.D. Vance is a true believer in anything. His views have changed radically over the years, from essentially center left to now a hard right. I don't think it's possible to say that he's serious about these views. The way that he enunciates them is almost like he's telling a joke. I think he's realized that if he rolls all the way to the hard right, he can attract a certain amount of attention. He's done so very effectively, very intelligently. He's no doubt extremely talented, but I don't think he believes in anything. I mean, the idea that this guy who's a venture capitalist, very wealthy person somehow believes in the plight of the white working class is absurd. So I think what we're talking about instead is two technically very talented politicians who got themselves locked into a program, which the basis of which is that America now is in a doomsday state. But it's not really.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Professor Snider, thank you very much indeed.